Yes, namaste. Welcome everyone for today's webinar on reconstructing Hindu history from the stars to scriptures with Dr. Raj Vedam. Glad to have all of you on today. Dr. Raji, we have so much to talk about, so much that you've been doing, and so much coming up. I'm looking forward to today's webinar. I think a lot of people in that are joining us are also. Ken from New Hampshire, thank you for joining. Heather from Louisville, Kentucky. Neela G from Vienna, Austria, very cool. Yeah, I told you I'll share the music with you shortly, but now let me talk about what we're going to cover in today's immersive and expansive conversation. We're gonna start with the story of Hindu civilization through kind of the twin lenses of both celestial science and sacred scripture. We're going to draw on insights that were shared by Dr. Raj Vedam at the Jaipur Dialogues, the annual summit that just happened in India. And he explored questions of knowledge, transmission, tradition, cultural identity, and continuity. And Dr. Vedam invites us all to continue on this journey that starts with the stars and culminates with the sutras, or maybe that's also another starting point. We're going to discover some ancient astronomical practices, such as those explored in the upcoming Genius of Hindu Astronomy retreat that we're hosting at our Pine Lake campus in Florida. And we're going to ground and inform that vision with what's presented in the Vedantic texts. So we're going to explore a lot of these subjects in today's webinar. It's a far-ranging thing, but there is nobody better to lead us through this than Dr. Raj Vedam. Dr. Raj Vedam is an amazing person. He's been with HUA for almost the beginning, 6 years now. He's taught so many courses. He is part of our history and methods area of study, our faculty. He holds a PhD in electrical engineering, but it's really his interdisciplinary expertise on Hindu history, on Indian astronomy, on science that brings him to us as a faculty. I'm not going to take too long in introducing you, Dr. Vedam. You've done so many lectures, so many published papers. And again, you were just at Jaipur Dialogues talking about these things. So, again, glad to have you with us today. And with that brief introduction, let me just hand it to you to get us started on what you want to talk about and frame the conversation. I'm here to support, as always. Thank you, everyone, for being here today.
Outstanding, and Kurji, thank you for inviting me and introducing me. So let me share my screen. If I can figure out which screen to share here, screen one, I guess. No, it is this one. Yes. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Great. Excellent. So at the outset, I got to say I didn't select this picture of me. Not too thrilled about it at all. But for some reason, this picture made its way over here.
This is a great
But
photo. Looking good, Raji.
I'm not so sure about that. But at any rate, so today, as Ankur has already set the stage, it's going to be reconstructing Hindu history from the stars to the scriptures. This is such a big and vast topic. The kind of thing that we do here at Hindu University of America. I offer three courses over here that over a course of 30 lectures, approximately 60 hours of instruction, we cover this topic in great detail. Clearly, we can't do that in a short webinar like this. So I'm going to give you an overview of what we do in this course. So before I start, Om Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. I pronounce to hundreds of teachers whose works we use and they've enlightened us. And Ankur has already talked about me, so I won't talk much about that. I want to open this out with this particular saying from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The sentiment in this particular verse is as in the microcosm, so in the cosmos. This is an amazing philosophical entity that appears in our ancient Vedic literature that says that as in the individual body, so also in the universe. As in the universe, so in the individual body. So our ancestors saw this connection between the skies and where we are on earth and our bodies and everything else. Today we can interpret this as fractals and so many other scientific interpretations. But what I'd like to take away from this is we have thousands of examples that show that Bharat was an ancient, philosophical, knowledge based system. Why do we have to say this? Why do we have to say this? We have to say this because have a deluge of misinformation thrust upon us ever since the colonial people somehow landed in India. Excuse me. So we have something called an Aryan invasion or an Aryan migration theory, depending on who you talk to. And it's a speculative theory. Where did that even originate from? Well, when William Jones he landed up in Kolkata, he observed that Latin and Greek are related to Sanskrit, and he had no idea why that was so. And he postulated that they probably had a common ancestor. So that set into motion a kind of thinking for the Europeans. And when Max Muller came on the scene, he said, yes, that common language is something he called Proto Indo European. Further, they situated the homeland of these people in Central Asia, between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. That is where the homeland of the people who spoke Proto Indo European. And in several waves, they colonized Europe, they colonized India, Iran, and these places. And that's why the languages are related, according to Max Muller. And if we move down in time to Mortimer Wheeler, who was an archaeologist, so when they discovered the ruins in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, he read the Rigveda in such a way that he said Rigveda is a war manual. It talks about the invading Aryans destroying the cities of the native Harappa people. So he was convinced that it was an invasion, an Aryan invasion of India, in which the Aryans invaded and destroyed the Indus Valley civilization. So these are the origins of a very speculative theory that we unfortunately carry the burden to the present day and bears upon a lot of things, including the retreat I'll talk about. So what is this theory? It says bands of male warriors from Central Asia invaded or migrated to India around 1500 BCE. They effectively replaced the existing civilization and they brought an entirely new Vedic religion, Sanskrit language, Vedic ecosystem, and so on. And the methodology they used for this was linguistics. So this has become something huge today, right? So we are seeing that it puts a whole lot of constraints on the chronology of the Indian civilization itself, that anything of value to the present civilization has to be dated after 1500 BCE, which is the date of the Aryan invasion. So I put in this table what I call evidence-based history, what I've been working on for several years now, and what I refer to as a questionable narrative of history, which is thrust on us in our textbooks, popular narrative, in the government discourse, and so on. So we can show that we are an ancient civilization, but we are told that we are a recent civilization. We can show we are indigenous similar people, but we are told that we are Aryans, Dravidians, tribals, and so on. We can show that knowledge systems developed independently in India, but then they say it developed with input from Babylon and Greece. We can show Vedanta as humane, enlightened philosophies, but we are positioned as aggressive, uncivilized, inhumane philosophies. We can show that Indian knowledge systems impacted other civilizations, but they tell us other civilizations impacted IKS. So clearly, we have got a bunch of, excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold. We got a bunch of opinions that are thrust upon us, and we have evidence that is showing something diametrically opposite. And I, as a scientist, cannot say something jingoistically. It has got to be backed by evidence, by data, and so on. So in my studies, what I found is there are several agencies that control the historiography of India. I talked to you about the colonial who initially they were concerned with several things. One was why is Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek related? And the second more distressing part for them, the Anglican Church to which the colonial people belonged, they believed that God created the world in 4004 BCE. God destroyed the world in 2500 BCE in Noah's flood. And after that is humanity's story. From Noah's progeny, that's where humanity's story emanates. But these colonial scholars were finding that Indian works had got great antiquity in them, going far beyond the 4004 BCE date. And how is that possible? So they were convinced that we have to correct, we meaning the white man's burden. They had to come and correct the Indian texts of all the incorrect things because the Bible said differently. So they had to conform it to Bible chronology. So they introduced a set of distortions starting with these ideas. Wherever the colonial people went, the missionaries were not far behind. They wanted to convert the southern Indian, where they landed, into Christianity. They were at the forefront of translating the Sanskrit literature, the Puranas, the Vedas, Brahmanas, Upanishads. So they translated them into European languages, whether it's German, English, and so on. Their translations were done with a motivation to show that Indians are backward, primitive, superstitious, stagnant, and to present Christianity as that is something that can enlighten them and take them out of the darkness, save their souls, and these kinds of things. So they introduced their own unique set of distortions. They were followed by the Eurocentric scholars, like I said, who wanted to address why Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek relate, and that came about a whole lot of distortions. Since 1947, when India got independence, we inherited Nehruvian socialism, which brought a unique set of ideas into India, which viewed the past as primitive. Socialism views the past as primitive, something that must be jettisoned and thrown out so that we can have a progressive, classless utopian future. That is how they saw the Indian future. So to them, Hinduism was the thing that has got to be destroyed. So they brought about constitutional laws that basically throttle the growth of Hinduism, and it exists to the present day in our constitution, where Hinduism is stifled with their idea that once it is thrown out, we can have a classless utopian society. Since 1972, Indira Gandhi, when she wanted to have political survival, she made a pact with the devil, in this case, the Marxists. So the Marxists wanted their pound of flesh, and that was they wanted the HRD sector, the human resources sector, because that is the way they knew to control the minds of Indians. So Nurul Hassan was appointed in 1972 as the education minister. He created and appointed the entire ecosystem of Marxist literature that we see controlling the roost even today in India. That is why we see a whole lot of horrendous narratives on what the Hindu faith is. The bottom line, we are seeing that the history of India has been hijacked by these agencies who have imposed their own ideologies on it and led to a subversion of our identities in the present. We cannot recognize ourselves in the narratives that these people have put forward, and they're trying to tell us, insist that this is who you are, but we can't recognize ourselves, our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, going back any amount of time. We can't recognize ourselves in what they tell us we are. So here is where we are today. And what we can see is these are not recent, right? I said these corruptions have happened over 300 years. For example, starting with the colonial hegemony, what I call the imperialist model, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, the British, and they were followed by the missionary model, people like Caldwell, Geo Pope, and others. So it is the Christian imperialism model, which presented Hinduism as a post-flood, Noah's flood, right? Religion. It is a caste-ridden system. Dravidians are oppressed people, and Brahminical Aryans are evil. They introduced these notions that persist to the present day, and they were joined with the Eurocentric scholars who use the mechanisms of linguistics, the failed ideas of anthropology, and the forced notion of caste. India had Jati, Varna, Kulam, Gotra. All of this was perverted into something called caste, which was positioned as hierarchical, immobile, and very aggressive kind of a system. This is how it was positioned, the caste system. So in order to prop up these narratives, they use the linguistic model. So they presented ideas that Aryans are a race. In India, Arya was meant as an honorific, as a noble man or a noble person. But these people perverted that into Aryans, which became a racial category. They furthered the caste system. they introduced the idea that India has got two language families, the Aryan and the so-called Dravidian. Those ideas came out of Eurocentric notions. And several other scholars have added to this with convergent ideologies, and that has strengthened what we call as our migration theory. Both of them are strengthened by these. And if we think that in the present day these are anachronisms, unfortunately that is not true, because we are seeing that whatever the colonial people said is received wisdom for the socialists and Marxists, because it fits their purposes very, very well. They don't have to challenge the colonial model. They don't have to challenge the Eurocentric or the missionary model, because socialists and Marxists also have skin in the game to try to present Hinduism as backward, primitive, superstitious, and only if we get rid of it, India will progress. So they continued with this, further importing outsider sociology, sociological models that were appropriate for the Western experience, which experienced slavery, ill treatment of women, world wars, and other such things. These models were appropriate for their civilization, but these have been imported by our socialists and Marxists and force fit on the Indian civilization. The angry white male has become the angry Brahmin male, for example. However ill-fitting this model, they still revel in writing papers that try to show how they've successfully imported a Western paradigm into the Indian context. Pathetic is the word for that. And they work with hand in hand with archaeology, an archaeological model. People like Maria Gimbutas, Colin Renfrew, and the others who tried to interpret archaeological finds in light of the Aryan invasion or migration theory. And there are several problems with that. And today there is also genetics, which is very big. People like David Reich and others. So they work with some assumptions, because genetics models are very loose mathematically. If you have to constrain them, you need to have some kind of logical mathematical constraints over there. For example, timelines, and so on. So they use the assumptions from the linguistic model in order to constrain the genetics model. And that results in absurd convergent ideologies, circular dependencies, questionable assumptions. So the bottom line is, our identity is under attack even to the present day by them. So you might wonder, why on earth do we have to establish historicity, what I've been trying to do for the past so many years? For that, we need to see the impact of the spurious Aryan invasion or migration narrative. This false narrative says that these arrived in India, either invasion or migration or tourism or whatever, in 1500 BCE. And it is presented as illiterate nomads, illiterate because they didn't have a script, oral tradition. These illiterate nomads from Central Asia, they destroyed the superior civilization of Harappa. And according to NCERT, Standard 11 textbook, where I reproduce this line verbatim, India had to wait for another 1000 years for civilization to return to Magadha. After Magadha made contact with the Greeks in 300 BCE, suddenly NCERT says we got the Brahmi script, Ashokan pillar writings and things like that. Suddenly we became civilized overnight after contact with the Greeks. Then they say you have not had enough time for knowledge generation, whether it is in mathematics, astronomy, medicine. If you got superior knowledge like Surya Siddhanta or Charaka Samhita or other such works, you must have learnt it from the earlier civilizations like the Babylonians, the Greeks, and so on. So this way, all the accomplishments of our ancestors have been taken away to service this failed ideology of the Aryan invasion migration. And what do we see over here? They tell us that Aryans brought Sanskrit into India from Central Asia. They say the script Brahmi is derived from Aramaic, which is a Semitic script that came from Levant into India. Mathematics and sciences is positioned as having come from Greece into India. Astronomy, the Babylonians taught us how to do astronomy. Turkic Muslims taught us culture, cuisine, architecture, music, and civilization. Before them, we had none of these things. And the British, they taught us science, technology, and rational thought. Even Bhakti was taught to us by Saint Thomas, who landed in Muziris in Kerala. So these are the kind of absurd narratives that are being thrust on us, which is a direct outcome of this Aryan invasion migration theory. So if one buys this theory, you have to buy all this nonsense that has been loaded on the Indian civilization. Excuse me. What we're seeing is there's a denial of agency in history. This has led to a gross distortion of identity and divisive forces. I call this a criminal distortion of the history of the Indian civilization. All the anchor points of a chronology, every aspect of Indian knowledge systems and our identity has been robbed and taken away. And I insist that many NCRT chairmen of the past, they should be behind bars because they are messed with the minds of millions of Indian children. And we have deracinated masses today who go around mouthing this kind of deracinated nonsense. It completely, which is against the evidence that there is. NCRT's got to take the responsibility for this, and they should be behind bars for civilizational crimes against Bharat. So I, as a scientist, have been trying to address this for several years now. I've spent more than 15 to 20 years studying this in various ways. And I say that we logical analysis of the data, models, methods, frameworks, and claims. If somebody claims there's an Aryan invasion, I want to know what data did you use to construct your linguistic. You say that I use something from archaeology. I want to see your archaeological data. What is the provenance of the data? What are the assumptions in your model? How relevant is that assumption to the claims that you're making? So, in other words, if you look for data for history, we got a whole lot of them in India. We got several models which have been applied on the Indian civilization, whether it's linguistics, archaeology, genetics. So I have been using this kind of a logical analysis of the models that have been proposed. I have tried to find out their primary sources, what is the data they have used, and over the years I have rebutted what I call enforced historiography with an evidence-based rational examination of facts. I have examined evidence from the Indian texts, from archaeology, from genetics, from climatology, from geology, from astronomy, and from several other fields. And the conclusion is India is an ancient civilization. These multiple disciplines, evidence from these areas shows a cultural continuity of the civilization. It is not as if we had Harappa, then Vedic, then Buddhist, and all these kind of things, but it's a continuum. Evidence is showing great antiquity contrary to the textbook assertions. So I'm not going to go deep into this because this is a huge seminar if I were to try to discuss these evidences, but I'll quickly talk about these things. Our texts, if you take a range of texts from any chronology of India, ancient, Vedic, all the way to classical, medieval periods and so on, whether northern India, southern India, eastern, western, not one text knows anything about invasion or migration. One might imagine that a civilization that has been reconstructed by having migrated from elsewhere must have some kind of exalting narratives talking about their homeland, where they came from. But none of the Indian texts say, we used to live in the mountains far away, we crossed these mountains and deserts and came to this land. None of them are saying that. None of the texts are saying, we killed all the people who were living here and then we replaced them. In southern India, none of the texts are saying, we used to live up in the north and then we were pushed down to the model or any such thing. So zero. There's absolutely no memory in any period of time in any text that talks about Aryan invasion, North India, South Aryan, Dravidian. None of them are talking about this. So the irony is, 300 years ago, the British came and put this idea into our heads, saying you're Aryans and Dravidians, and we have wholesale bought into this philosophy, whereas the common sense evidence is staring at us. None of our texts say anything about this. Then if we take a look at archaeology, in archaeology, a paradigm for a new civilization or idea is that there must be a change in the ceramic record. Ceramic means things like pottery, the style of pottery, and so on. So if Aryans had come to India through an invasion or migration in 1500 BCE, our expectation is geological layers corresponding to that period, we should find a new pottery style that has come from the outside. But horrors, there is nothing in India. In India, we have something called ochre colored pottery going back to almost 3000 BCE. In a continuum, they exist. Then we got painted graveware, which is a much later period. We got several other pottery styles, but nothing that can conclusively be said this is evidence of Aryans coming into India. So the bottom line, our texts have no evidence. In archaeology, we find no ceramic records of invasion or migration. And if we go to archaeology and paleontology, we can show great antiquity of human presence in India. In my talks on Sangam Talks and elsewhere, including my courses here at Hindu University of America, I expend great effort to show how we have got stone tools recovered from Tamil Nadu going back to 1 million years ago. 1 million years ago, the species living in India was probably Homo erectus. After Homo erectus, we presume there's been Denisovans and maybe mixing with Neanderthals and maybe later on what we call the modern Homo sapien. So in this continuum that we see, we are seeing stone tools right from 1 million years ago, going to 300,000 years ago, going to 150,000 years ago, and so on. So we are finding in archaeology a continuum of stone tools of increasing complexity, showing that the cranial capacity is larger and larger. Further, in Arun Sonakia in 1982, he recovered a skull from the Narmada River Valley. What is unique about the skull, as discussed by bone specialist Kenneth Kennedy, is that it has got a cranial capacity of nearly 1,400 cubic centimeters. What is unique about that? If we take 300,000 years ago, if we presume that Homo erectus was close to them, if it was Homo erectus, their cranial capacity from fossil records in Africa and China is 1000 cc. This is 400 cc more, the cranial capacity. What does it tell us? It tells us that this is probably a modern Homo sapien. This is what Kenneth Kennedy said. So from nearly 350,000 years ago, we've got these kind of specimens. Bottom line, if we examine archaeology and paleontology, we are seeing great antiquity of human presence in India. It is not as if it was empty lands into which some people came, invaded, and settled, and so on. We are seeing from 1 million years ago, 300,000 years ago, 150,000 years ago, cave paintings in Bhimbetka 40,000 years ago. We are seeing rock art all over India, not only Bhimbetka around 40 to 30,000 years ago. We are seeing underwater artifacts in Pumpuhar 18,000 years ago. In Dwarka, we are seeing underwater artifacts 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. Then in Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, from around 5,000 years ago, we're seeing artifacts all the way going down to present times. Bottom line, India is a settled land and for a very, very long period of time. Then if we take river hydrology and radiocarbon dating, this shows great antiquity of the Hindu civilization in India. For example, the Rigveda talks about a powerful Saraswati River flowing all the way from the mountains to the ocean. Now there's a problem. The problem is there is no such river Saraswati where it is supposed to be. Between the Indus and the eastern rivers, there is no Saraswati. So this was positioned as a mythical river by the colonial people, by the missionaries, by the Marxist, socialists and others. However, we have had a whole lot of scientists who studied this along with satellite imagery that clearly shows the paleo channels of an ancient river in parallel to the Sindhu River or the Indus River. And we have found several archaeological sites on the river banks. Today, where there is no river, on those banks we have found settlements. Very, very intriguingly. We know from river hydrology that the Saraswati River was a powerful river flowing in two periods of time. One very ancient period of time, it is a perennial river flowing throughout the year. Then, in the second period of time, up to about 1900 BCE, this river was flowing continuously. In 1900 BCE, it had trickled down because we had monsoon failures in India for nearly 200 years, which is another story over here. And we also had plate tectonic movements. The Himalayan belt is very active. And those tectonic movements resulted in the Sutlej. Sutlej River used to feed into Saraswati, but that changed course and started feeding into the Indus. That starved the Saraswati River. Secondly, Yamuna, which was flowing into the Saraswati, changed course and started flowing eastward. Because of these, the Saraswati River ran dry by 1900 BCE. Why is that date important? Because according to Max Muller and the linguistic theory, Aryan invasion or migration has happened in 1500 BCE. Max Muller says all of the Vedic literature was composed in India following that, right? Because the Vedas are God geopresence, geographical presence of India. It talks of the rivers, mountains of India. It could not have been composed in Central Asia. It had to be composed in India. So, if Max Muller is right, then how could the invading Aryans have come in 1500 BCE and written about a non-existent river? It's impossible. So, river hydrology tells us a powerful story that the Aryans, the so-called Aryans, were living in India far before this 1500 BCE. Then we have radiocarbon dating in several sites today in Raki Gadi, in Birana, and Mega, and other places. Our scientists have gone and done radiocarbon dating on the carbon remains in these archaeological sites. And some of the oldest evidences are startling. For example, Birana, some of the oldest calibrated dates come to 9,500 years before present. That is 7,500 BCE. That is a date of some of the artifacts that they have recovered from Birana and other such places. This shows to you a continuum. People have been living in a continuum for a very, very long period of time. Additionally, B.B. Lal, who was a very respected archaeologist who passed away a couple of years ago, he had also said in the final stages of his career, he said there is no way you can separate out the cultural periods of India into this so-called Harappa period, Vedic period. He said all artifacts are found in a continuum. For example, the Pashupati seal from Mohenjo-daro, that can be dated to 3500 BCE, showing a proto-Shiva. We got Shivalinga from
Raji, can you
Kalibara.
go to the next screen?
Um, what are
There
you
it is.
seeing?
We're seeing the cover screen, archaeology, evidence, river hydrology. And
Yes, I'm talking about the same thing.
there's no images or other details there.
No, because it's meant to be summary. There's so much to talk over
We
here.
got so
There's
much
only a
time. Okay.
summary. But I know I'm taking a long time talking about the summary. But but anyway, we have got a whole lot of antiquity coming in from radiocarbon dating. Another line of evidence is archaeometallurgy. Now, there's a claim that the Harappan people only had a bronze technology. Their bronze swords were weak, and the invading Aryans had got iron into India. Iron swords could easily overwhelm the Harappans. That's why these bands of warriors were able to overcome the Harappans. This is the theory. Now, unfortunately for that narrative, we are finding the oldest iron in India can be dated back to pretty ancient periods of time. For example, in Hyderabad, 2200 BCE in Gachibowli, we have recovered iron artifacts done by OSL dating to around 2400 to 2200 BCE. Excuse me. And earlier this year, in March, Tamil Nadu government released a report saying in Shivagalai they have recovered iron artifacts going back to 3300 BCE, the oldest iron anywhere in the world. If you leave out the meteoric iron of the Egyptians and the Hittites, this is the oldest iron that was worked by anybody anywhere in the world. It is in India. We also see evidence of this technology migrating from the south to the north. The oldest iron is in southern India and the later iron is in northern India. If the Aryans brought iron coming into India from northwest, our expectation is that we should see earliest iron in northwest India. That is not true. We're seeing later iron over there. So clearly the paradigms and assumptions in the linguistic model about invading Aryans is being challenged by a whole lot of evidence in these slides that I'm showing to you. Genetics is another big thing that's being used today. But like I said, it is inconclusive on ancestry of Indians. What I'm saying is contrary to what you read in the scientific papers out there. which tries to position Indians as two main poles, the ANI and the ASI, ancestral North Indian, ancestral South Indian, and then attempts to cluster the Indian genome around the North Indian and the South Indian using what they call the AASI, ancestral South Indian, as well as step components for the North Indian. And they try to cluster Indians and say so much of percentage of North Indians have got step ancestry, so much of them have got step ancestry, and they claim certain things based on these things. There are big problems in these models, very, very big problems. The selection of the data, the kind of populations they select, the kind of numbers they select, the kind of assumptions in these models, like I said, the time clades, all these kind of things. So in my talks, I spent great amount of effort trying to show the problems of genetics. So contrary to, despite their publishing in papers like Cell or Nature and so on, one must do a second take on all of these papers. There is a problem. There's a problem in the methodology. The methodology cannot yield to answers that we are, to the data that we are seeing over here. So only by misrepresenting the data can they come out with papers like this. So they are trying desperately to align with linguistic analysis. And that is the reason why it's inconclusive. If you take the evidence I am showing in several other areas, then clearly genetics is not answering that. Genetics is not able to answer, is it out of India? It insists it's into India. Nothing in the mathematics of genetics can tell us that it is from out of India into India. Nothing can tell us about such gradients. Then the other areas, Vedic astronomy. Now this is the one of great interest to us going forward, because a whole lot of our texts, the Brahmanas, the Upanishads, Aranyakas, and others, they show very great antiquity. So, in summary, we have got very deep antiquity in Indian astronomy. For example, Vedanga Jyotisha can be dated to 1440 BCE. In Vishnu Purana, the Dhruva story can be dated to 2800 BCE. Shatapatha Brahmana talks about Kritika at vernal equinox. That can be dated to 2982 BCE. The Kali Yuga, planet clustering in Revati Nakshatra, that can be dated to 3102 BCE. Then Aditi, as she appears in the Aitriya Brahmana, it refers to vernal equinox at Punarvashu Nakshatra. This can be dated to 6000 BCE. Then Ashwins in the Markandeya Purana at the winter solstice. This can be dated to 7200 BCE. I have only curated a few items from our vast repertoire of data points that is present in our texts. I've only taken a few of them, and we will work these things. In the course that I offer, we go through in detail with planetarium software, which I plan to do at the retreat in addition, which I'll talk to you about in a couple of minutes. We plan to go in detail where you can have a hands-on understanding of what are these data points we're talking about and how can we validate this using modern software. So we will learn all of these kinds of things. But the bottom line is we are seeing deep antiquity in Indian astronomy, contrary to what Max Muller is saying. Max Muller is saying all of these Puranas, Upanishads, Brahmanas were all composed after 1500 BCE. If they were composed after 1500 BCE, how on earth do they contain data points for such great antiquity? This is conveniently left out with the people who are pushing linguistics and so on. So all pointing to out of India migrations. For example, we have evidence from climatology that in 2000 BCE, India experienced a 200-year monsoon failure. This interruption to the Indian civilization. We are seeing a clear before and after. You see an urban civilization before 2000 BCE. After that, you're seeing that the urban civilization somewhat degraded. And once again, we are seeing urbanization a later period. So this can be traced back to the smoking gun. The smoking gun in climatology is a monsoon failure for 200 years in India. We have evidence that in that period of time, our ancestors seem to have migrated out of India and settled in the Fertile Crescent. Fertile Crescent is the Tigris River Valley, the Nile River Valley, and the Euphrates River Valley. We have a lot of evidence from animal genomics, from their own texts, from several other cuneiform texts and others. There's a lot of data we have accumulated for this. This is clearly pointing to an out of India migration. So the evidence is India is an ancient civilization, and there's absolutely no doubt about it. Pretty ancient civilization. What we have done is we have taken texts, we have taken astronomy, archaeology, paleontology, genetics, climatology. I didn't talk to you today about agricultural genomics and animal genomics, but every one of these data points, if you examine the evidence, it is sitting between 8000 BCE to 3000 BCE. The only outlier is linguistics, which is the received wisdom of colonial historians, saying the Indian civilization is post 1500 BCE. In science, we always learn that if the preponderance of evidence is pointing over here and there's one outlier, you must leave out the outlier or you'll bias your results otherwise. So we throw this out and say the civilization is pretty ancient. So if you're an ancient civilization, you must show evidence of accumulation of knowledge. Like I said earlier, they claim that Indians learned from Babylonians and Greeks. We can take Indian knowledge systems and we can put them in several categories. For example, I sliced the data into philosophical content, Shruti and Smriti, encyclopedic content, example, Puranas, humanities content, music, arts, laws, Arthashastra, Natyashastra, scientific and artisan content in math, astronomy, health, sciences, tech, or agriculture. We are seeing a range of Indian works. Tremendous numbers of works exist that show this is an ancient civilization that's accumulated a whole lot of evidence. So the question is, why do we even study Indian knowledge systems? It is because we want to establish the historicity. Once we establish historicity, we did that by first debunking Aryan invasion migration, showing the antiquity with evidence. Then we show the development of Indian knowledge systems. That gives a unique Bharatiya perspective of the world and strength of civilizational ideas that Indians have. And to understand ancient wisdom accumulated over tens of centuries, in fact, present day world. So what are the knowledge domains transmitted to the world? We can show that language, the so-called Indo-European, is an export out of India. We can show that during the migrations that I talked to you about. Mathematics, astronomy, medical knowledge, agriculture, whether it's crops, animals, spices, music, philosophy, religion, in addition, manufacturing, metals, textiles, perfumes, including today mind sciences, quantum models, these are all exports out of Indian knowledge system to the rest of the world. This is not a jingoistic statement, but we've got a whole lot of data where we move beyond the self-exalting statements of Eurocentric people who source all knowledge to the Greeks and Babylonians. We go beyond that and show how did the Greeks get this knowledge and so on, and we show these things. So, moving forward, give me a minute here. So the reality that we can show is that in various periods of time, whether it is in 3000 BCE, it's from India to Sumeria, we got evidence of this. In 2000 BCE, after the monsoon failure to the Fertile Crescent, going to the Nile River Valley, Tigris River Valley, Euphrates, and from there going to the Mitannis and the Hittites, and from the Hittites to the Minoan people of the Greeks, we can show these things. We can show around 500 to 200 BC, the Greek philosophers who came to India and took knowledge out of India. We can show the Indo-Roman trade from 200 BC to 400 current era through the Red Sea that took Indian knowledge. We can show Islamic transmissions from 700 current era from India to Baghdad, from Baghdad injected into Spain, and from Spain diffused into Europe between 1000 current era to 1600 current era. We can show to Armenia and Syria between 400 BC to 1800 current era, direct transmission from India, the colonial times, 1700s to the present times, including to China, to the Buddhist circuit, Hindu kingdoms from the Mauryan times into Southeast Asia, and the Tamil kingdoms going out over here. So in various periods of times, in various geographies, I have accumulated vast amounts of evidence, which we cover in great detail in our courses. I'm not going to go through the evidences, but there is a whole lot of evidence we talk about. And the conclusion is that we can show knowledge transfers from India in various periods of time. And what we are learning in schools and universities is utterly wrong. I call it Indian deep history. Five agencies have enforced their ideologies, frameworks controlling the historiography of India: colonial, Eurocentric, missionary, socialist academia, and the Marxist. There is strong evidence to uphold the antiquity of Indian civilization. Multidisciplinary evidence shows no invasion or migration. It rather shows the antiquity of civilization in India. We have well developed mathematics, astronomy, and we can show how Indian knowledge system seeded the ancient to modern world. All this is unacknowledged in Eurocentric accounts that originated from colonial historiography onwards, and we need to present this evidence and show these things. I offer three courses at Hindu University of America that discusses these things. Like I said, they got 10 lectures each, so 30 lectures and 2 hours each, so 60 hours. We cover all of this material that I have shown to you over here, which is methods and history and methods of Indian astronomy, reconstructing Hindu history, commissions and omissions. And going forward, we also have what we call an experiential Hindu astronomy. Several of you asked for something like this, and we listened. And we have designed a 3-day retreat in the lovely Pine Lake Center near Orlando, where one can learn and connect with the stars in a very unique way. We'll have classroom instructions in the morning where I'll present to you Hindu astronomy and other aspects. And at night time, we will take telescopes and binoculars, and we will have experts who will point out various things in the skies, and we'll do observations. So we'll make a powerful connection between what you read and the reality out there in the night sky. And this is being designed by myself, Dr. Aditya Thogi, who is an astronomer in Texas, a professor of astronomy in Texas, and by Eve Mendoza, who's worked a lot in Jyotisha. So we call this the genius of Hindu astronomy, Ganita Phalita Jyotisha. So this is between 11th to 14th December. It's in the Pine Lake Retreat in Florida, so please look it up. And it starts on Thursday, December 11th in the evening hours at 7 p.m. Ends on Sunday, December 14th, the morning hours. And it is in a place called Groveland, which is where the HUA campus is. To give you an idea, this is Orlando, this is where Groveland is. And we have several goals for the retreat. In general, we will present astronomy in the Vedic text, the celestial calendar, how Indians measured and calculated the movements of the heavenly bodies, stories as encoder of astronomy, use of planetarium software, antiquity of Indian astronomy, identifying nakshatras in the night sky, which is outdoors, then the Ganita part of it, as well as the Hora Jyotisha part of it, and the Phalita Jyotisha, interpretive study, as well as observational temporal study. This is very unique. Nowhere else will you find something that combines all of these into a retreat of this fashion. So I encourage you all to take a look at this retreat and attend it. With that, I've come to the end. Excuse my cold. I've been battling this for the last week or so. But we are open for question and answers. So, Ankur, I turn it over to you.
Amazing presentation. I feel like I went through both of your classes, the Reconstructing Hindu History. I've hosted so many webinars. Every time, it's amazing. It's impressive. Just I love it. Appreciate you so much, and I think a lot of our audience does as well. We have
Thank
a
you.
few questions. Santoshji, do you want to unmute yourself? I'll give you the ability to unmute yourself because you have several questions. If you can unmute yourself, you can get your
Thank you.
questions in.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Good morning. And Dr. Raj Vedam ji, appreciate your courses. I have attended your courses before and really enjoy it. So never miss a chance to listen to you. I wanted to see if you may have an opinion on the out of India theory and the dating theory of the Rig Veda from Jijit Nadumuri Ravi and the review critiques of it that were published by Srikant Talagiri ji. Obviously both are advancing the out of India theory, but in very different ways and in very different approaches. I myself have actually learned the Rig Veda. I recite the entire Rig Veda, and I do that on a daily basis. And some of the things about the age of the mandalas seems in conflict with the organization of the Rigvedic mandalas by the composer in some cases and by the deity worship, such as the ninth mandala in some cases. So I would be very interested in your thoughts about these two very preliminary writers on this topic were being in conflict on their approaches to
Right.
how they view it.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that very insightful question there, Santoshji. So, there is no easy answer to give you. Jijat Ravi is also a faculty at HUA, and Srikant Talagiri, somebody I respect quite a bit, along with several other researchers. The best way to see this is we have an active research environment in Indic studies. It is not as if everything's written down, everything is done, and we can go to textbooks and start publishing these things and so on. Like I said, the five frameworks have messed up our history so much that various people have taken it on themselves to try to research this and present various views of it. This is how I see the works of Jijat Ravi, who is a very serious researcher who spent many years collating results and trying to analyze them. And so also Shrikant Thalagiri, very uh, excuse me, serious author who has studied the Rig Veda and tried to put forward his ideas on linguistic analysis and so on. And as well as several other researchers you see today, including myself, Subhash Kak, Nilesh Oak, and many others, Vedavir Arya and others, who are trying to understand the data that they have analyzed. Each of these researchers have analyzed data and they're trying to construct a narrative that makes most sense to them. So we as consumers of this knowledge, the best we can do is appreciate it's an active research environment. So things may change in the future as new generations of researchers come, as new data comes, we may be able to have better and better understandings of our past. So dismiss nothing at this point, but use your own logic. You said that you are intimately familiar with the Rig Veda. You yourself have got some ideas about the antiquity or the relative dating of some of the deities presented in the Rig Veda. So use those kind of ideas to see where you differ with either Jijat Ravi or Srikant Talagiri and others. And maybe some new theories can come. So we need people like that, like yourself, Santoshji, who have actually expended effort to read the Rig Veda, to understand it, recite it, and come with new insights. So please be forthcoming with your own writings, whether it's blog articles or a book even, that will help the rest of us to understand these things.
Thank you, Raj Vedamji.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Santoshi, for being here, for asking your question, for being engaged. Right, I think this Ramakrishnaji kind of has a follow-up question. You already answered it a little bit, but let me just read his question. Is this line of inquiry finding foothold in Indian schools of research? So you mentioned there's the progress. We have all these different faculty or professors doing serious research. I think it's finding a foothold. We're a part of that. Just maybe a little bit on that to add if you have anything. We have quite a few
Right.
questions.
Right. So to answer that, uh, we are seeing that the current NCRT has got something called NEP, National Education Policy, through which they want to introduce Indian knowledge systems into the curriculum and put that into focus. Unfortunately, it is not a strong enough focus that also talks about these foundational ideas, Aryan invasion, migration, throwing them out, the antiquity, historicity of these things. It's one thing to learn Indian knowledge systems, which means you learn the contents of, let's say, Ayurveda, you learn Ayurveda, you learn some things from Surya Siddhanta. It's entirely another thing to talk historicity of these traditions. If you don't talk historicity, then for every claim to say Aryabhatta did this, some wise guy comes from Europe and says that, oh, but Ptolemy had done that earlier. And you say that Shushruta had done this. They'll say, oh, Galen in the Roman Empire had done that earlier. If you don't know historicity, how will you establish the antecedents of knowledge systems? So NEP is one direction, a small and good direction to go towards to learn IKS, but we need to fortify that with historicity. In my courses at HUA, I emphasize historicity of Indian knowledge systems precisely for this. It's my hope that in the future we'll see an adoption of these things.
Nice. Yeah, so many people made some comments. Ken, really appreciate your comment on the pattern of European invaders writing their own version of history. I don't know if you remember, Dr. Vidham, for one of the classes I took with you, I wrote that Whose Common Era. It turned it into a blog. I just shared it in the chat if you're a little curious about that, some of our audience. So part of what we do is, as Raji said about Santoshi, who asked that question, right? We encourage people to take the classes, share their ideas, And if it's good, if it's been worked on, we can publish it. We can continue to provide and share more knowledge and information that makes this conversation more accessible, engaging, and all of that. So glad to do that. I shared a link to the astronomy retreat in the chat. Please do click through, see that. We did a webinar on it earlier with some of the details. We're going to do a more detailed webinar on the astronomy retreat tomorrow, also including Vidushi Eve and Dr. Togi, Aditya ji. There's quite a few questions. I don't know if you want to pull some from the Q&A, and please put your questions in the Q&A box instead of the chat. Makes
Q&A.
it
Let me
easier.
open that. How do they date iron and stone? Radiocarbon dating works in organic matter. Very good, insightful question. Ah, my video has gone off. Eh? How did that happen? Okay. So let's see. So archaeologists use, like you correctly said, radiocarbon dating for carbon artifacts. C14 is used. The half-life of C14 isotope is used to determine and it's accurate up to about 50,000 years. After that, the accuracy falls off and so on. So for older specimens, there are other ways in which one can estimate the antiquity. One of them is called OSL, optical simulated luminescence. When an artifact has been buried under the soil for a long period of time, it accumulates cosmic rays. As cosmic rays come through the earth, it accumulates that, basically electrons and other such things. And when it is exposed to the atmosphere, a reverse process happens. So scientists can calibrate this to try to say how old is an artifact by seeing the ratio of these kind of things, the emission versus how much it has accumulated over time. So OSL is used to date some of these things going back to 1 million years, especially iron tools, stone tools, and so on. And in some cases, even that accuracy is not good enough. So people go to uranium-based, plutonium-based, which have got much, much longer half-lives. Study this in detail, I recommend a book called Nature's Clock. Nature's Clock. Search for that book and read it. It gives you a nice exposition of the methods that we can use to date. Okay, Nalini from Pune. It's always good to hear. My question is, considering the force fitting of the timeline of history, what would be the period of Mahabharata, which is in the Dwapara Yuga and Ramayana and Treta Yuga? So I'm not going there. I'm not going there because we don't have enough data to uniquely say Mahabharata is this period, Ramayana is this period. We got several versions of these texts. We got several data points that differ from one to the other. Our interpretation of some of this data also differs. So we have got a very active today where researchers are basically duking it out, trying to say what is the correct interpretation of various things. I am not going there because I don't want to get caught in that quagmire. There's a lot of things to talk about the Bharatiya civilization without going into the Itihasa dating itself. Let us follow the works that various researchers are doing, whether it's Rajaram Mohan Roy, whether it's Nilesh Oak, Vedavir Arya, and several others who are proposing dates, chronology for the Itihasas. Let's follow their works, see their methods, see their data, their methodology, and try to understand for ourselves where it might be. But I don't think the final word has been said, and neither am I willing to make any statement on that. Okay, another question, Catherine. Will you be doing another retreat maybe in a year's time? I can't be in the December 11th one. Well, we will certainly try. This is a second retreat at this point. We offered one last year, the same period. We had plans to meet in summer, but summer is not the best of times because the sun sets later, the viewing period is lower. And Florida, if you know what I mean, a lot of bugs out there in night sky. It's not very nice. Winter is a whole lot nicer because of those reasons. So we will try. We'll try to do one in about a year's time. John, there's a great deal of commercial other travels between Rome and India, Greeks. The contact is not likely to be an interchange of ideas, rather one-way flow. Good question, and that is something that interlocutors often ask. But we are not talking about 500 BCE philosopher exchange. We are not talking Indo-Roman trade between 200 BC to 400 current era. We are talking much more ancient. We are talking Hittites to Minoan transmissions. Minoans are 1500 BCE. I have accumulated a great deal of evidence that shows knowledge from India in use in all of these places. And we can show the impact of Indian knowledge systems in various areas, in various whether it's medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and other areas. We can show the impact on the on either Europe, or Europe of those days was only Roman Empire, or on Greece. We can show the impact on those two places. So yes, there should have been an interchange of ideas and knowledge, but we are seeing that an overwhelming amount of ideas went from India outside. One major conduit was the Library of Alexandria. Library of Alexandria was set up in the port city of Alexandria, which is in the Mediterranean port near Egypt. And birthing ships set up by somebody called Ptolemy, and birthing ships over there were required to part with their books to be copied in that library, where the originals will be kept in the library and the copies will be given back to the ship owners. And this was done primarily to capture knowledge coming from India into the Mediterranean lands. And evidence of that is there all over the place. All the Greek greats, the exalted people of the Greek civilization, whether it's Eratosthenes, whether it's Hypatia, whether it is several other people, they all use the resources of Library of Alexandria to make any claim that they had. We can show the antecedents of their ideas in earlier Brahmana Upanishad literature. I do that in my course. With the Shatapatha Brahmana or other Upanishads, I show how those ideas have become somehow transmitted into Library of Alexandria and gone on to the Greeks and taught by them. So it's a good question, but do look at my talks and for more details on these things. Vijay Kane, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Can the use of number zero be evidence of history? When did the European Union start using zero? So yes, that is zeros. Now, I say this in an offhand way. The European texts, Eurocentric texts, I should qualify, when we study the history of sciences, everything is sourced obligatorily to the Greeks and the Babylonians. If at all they acknowledge India, it's a footnote. It's a footnote in the history of sciences where they say, yeah, the Indians had zero, figuratively, zero, and just a symbol for zero. So this is the way India is presented in their works. It's a culmination of the colonial, Eurocentric, and missionary literature that has led to this horrendous state of affairs over here, which has encoded the Aryan invasion as constraints, and that's why they say these kinds of things. Zero, we know, has been in use for a very, very long time. We got a philosophical zero in Shunya that is there in Vedic literature for a very, very long time. Emptiness is discussed and other such things. We know that zero as a placeholder was there in cuneiform texts of the Babylonians, Neo-Babylon especially, 500 BC onwards. They have been using zero as a placeholder. They didn't have zero. This is an empty space, which led to a lot of interpretive issues and things of that nature. The symbol for zero clearly originated in India. The earliest we have is Bakshali manuscript, carbon dated in Bodleian Library, Oxford, to 220 current era, that clearly shows zero being used. Zero was not used in Europe until much, much later. Europe was making use of Latin numerals and the geometric ideas. Even Leonardo da Vinci, all of his works are done using geometry, not by using algebra. Algebra was a unique Indian invention. Zero was used in India, positive numbers, negative numbers, Brahmagupta. This knowledge went through the Muslims. From Muslims, it went to Spain. From Spain, it got diffused in Toledo and went to Christian Europe from there on and seeded the so-called Renaissance. We are seeing evidence of zero coming in much later. We see that Leonardo of Pisa, who is very popular for the Fibonacci series. So he, in 12th century or so, wrote about Indian numbers, but that was not popular because of a handwritten document, right? Those days, knowledge could only be transmitted if somebody goes to a monastery and copies down the scrolls and such things. Also, the Pope called Sylvester, excuse me, he also talked about Indian numbers, but his work is also not popular. There's a German called Adam Ries. He wrote a book on Indian numbers, place value computation, shift and add multiplication, and he showed how vastly superior it is to Latin numerals. He was lucky because this book was printed after Gutenberg had his modified printing press. So this book became an overnight sensation in Europe. Overnight in 15 to 1600s, Europe threw out the Latin numerals and started using the Indian numerals as we know it today. So that is the instance that you see zero appearing in European literature. Ish, when our scriptures mention the earth's gola, universe is under, what time period do you believe these come from? That question is very loose. We can't talk about that. So the notions of Brahmanda come from very, very earlier times. If you take a look at Rigveda, we got cosmological ideas appearing over there itself. And they talk about various ideas on cosmology. So we'll not go there, but these are very ancient as far as ancient as the Rigveda itself. Traditional Hindu beliefs hold that the Saraswati joins the Ganga and the Yamuna at Prayaga. How do you reconcile that? The theory Saraswati flowed westward parallel to the Sindhu. I don't know. I only go with evidence. The evidence shows the paleo channels of the Saraswati flowing parallel to the Sindhu and going into meeting the ocean. That's what we go with the evidence. There are several very fine researchers like Dr. Aninder Sarkar from IIT and places like that. They have published papers in Nature, the detailed work they have done to prove the existence of this river. So I suggest you read those works. Venkatachalam, Ptolemy, Cleopatra's grandfather, brought in knowledge of India and China and Caesar's. He spent time learning a lot of things constantly. We need to, when assertions like this are made, we need to back it with facts and so on. But there's no doubt that the Ptolemy we are talking about is not the Ptolemy who wrote Almagest. This is the Ptolemy the ruler, I think, in an earlier time frame. So he set up Library of Alexandria. So they were already exposed to Indian works through the Greek philosophers, as well as through the even more ancient migrations they talked about, the 2000 BC migrations they talked about. So host of evidences that show the impact of Indian thinking on the people in these places.
And you have gotten through all of the questions, Raji. Amazing. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Let me just say a few things, and then we'll get into Raji to conclude. I did put the link to the retreat in the chat. There's a poll up. Let us know if you're interested in enrolling in the retreat, if you have questions, if you're interested in any of Raji's courses. We'll be sure to follow up. The recording of the webinar will be sent out to everyone who registered, so you'll be able to share it. But as was covered, right? This webinar is just a little bit. There's so much more. You got to take a course. You got to enroll in a program. Join us for the retreat. Read books. There's so much out there. And Dr. Raj Vedam.
Quick answer, Ankurji. Sorry, quick answer. Heather had asked a question. Last name of the Adam person who brought zero is Ries, Ries. Adam Ries. He was a German, and he published a book on computing.
Nice. And it's amazing how you can pull all this information out and give an answer. It's so amazing. You're glad to have you as a faculty. I think so many people are so impressed. Nilaji from Croatia, thank you for joining. I'll do a follow-up with your organization, Sri Madhusudan Sai Global Humanitarian Mission. Thank you for joining from Croatia. Pramodiniji, thank you for registering. Awesome that you are already registered. Yes, Ishi, what a great session we had today. Yeah, with that, let me hand it to Dr. Raj Vedam to conclude our webinar from the stars to scriptures, reconstructing Hindu history. What an amazing conversation and dialogue. Just part of the Samvada, right? The continuing dialogue that we have. And, we love having faculty like Dr. Raj Vedam who are at the tip of the spear, right? Pioneers are really creating this field, and he's been doing it, as you mentioned, for decades, and we're glad to be on this journey together. So Dr. Vedam, let me hand it to you for some closing thoughts.
Thank you, Ankurji, for organizing this webinar. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to come and talk to you about some of the research I've been doing for the last several years on these topics. I know that many of you might find this contrary to what you're reading in textbooks, what you're seeing in popular media, government accounts and all these things, but do see my talks, do see the evidences that I present, and you'll see different pictures coming entirely based upon the latest research in different areas, multiple disciplines. And I also encourage you to come to the retreat At the retreat, you'll have me, Dr. Togi, as well as Eve, and we'll be there on site to help you understand the skies as well as the implication of the skies. So do take a look at the astronomy retreat and hope to see you all there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. See you at the next webinar and, of course, at the retreat. Sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions. I think a few more came in, but we'll take them offline and we'll connect soon. Dhanyawad. Namaste. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.